appreciate the select board giving me a few minutes to raise this issue again. The task force met on October 1st, and at that meeting we were informed of the select board's decision on the 23rd to pave Lake Mansfield Road and close it in one-way direction, or utilize it in a one-way direction. I think there's some confusion as to exactly what the objective is moving forward. The task force voted to recommend the select board reconsider this, and we thought if we could provide just a little bit more context, maybe it would give you different information to support that reconsideration. If someone would mind maybe hitting half the lights, I think the photos will show up a little bit better. Thank you, Chris. Okay, thank you. So just real briefly, the Lake Mansfield Improvement Task Force is just over a decade old, and the task force was formed by the select board and given a charge of duties to develop and implement a comprehensive Lake Mansfield improvement plan. And we address a wide range of concerns on that task force, but chief among them are public safety, use and accessibility, water quality, lake improvements, protection of the watershed, and stewardship. The task force is made up of citizens of the community, as well as a select board member, park and rec member, planning board member, and we have staff advisory from DPW and the town manager's office. Over the years, the town has elected to invest and make improvements in Lake Mansfield. Just want to remind everybody what those have been over the last 10 years or so. We've done invasive species analysis, aquatic vegetation reduction, water quality monitoring is ongoing. In 2016, the town invested funds to do a comprehensive recreation area plan that was for the entire lake area, not just the roadway. And then out of that, in 2017, we've gone forward with a survey and a preliminary engineering analysis so that we can understand what some of our constraints are and how to move forward with that comprehensive lake improvement plan. But in addition to studies and design, there's also been quite a few physical improvements that have happened in the lake area. Those include extensive landscape improvements in the beach area, including the weed fabric that goes down in the swim area, trees, play structures, improvements to the forest trail, invasive species removal. There was a significant stand of Phragmites taking over the north end of the lake that's been removed. The addition of swimmer changing facilities, and then things that people don't see and maybe don't have an appreciation for, but the town is successful in getting a grant a number of years ago to install a sediment collector on Castle Hill. That collector, last I heard, collects about 35 tons of sediment each year and prevents that sediment from flowing into the lake. Last year there were improvements to the boat launch area that was made through a grant from the state. And then also we received an additional grant to put in a second sediment collector, and that was just installed below Knob Hill. So, you know, there's been ongoing improvements. So we wanted to revisit the Lake Mansfield Improvement Task Force recommendation. That recommendation was to close Lake Mansfield Road from Knob Hill at the south to 30 Lake Mansfield Road at the north. I've tried to indicate on this graphic the southern closure point on the right side and the northern closure point, which is about midpoint along the roadway there. That's approximately 1,000 feet of roadway, and that's the section of the roadway that is both closest to the lake physically, but also in very rough shape. We want to stress that this recommendation does not limit people's access to the lake. You can still take your car to the south end of the lake. You could still approach the lake from the north end to the parking area and the beach area. It just removes vehicular traffic along the 1,000-foot section of the road that's in the worst condition. Why did the task force make this recommendation? First and foremost, it supports the long-term recommendation of the task force, which is to close that section of the roadway to automobile traffic. Second, it avoids the expense in the short term of paving the roadway. Part of the reason the task force recommended long-term that the roadway be closed was to open up opportunities to the town to fund the improvements in this area through grant dollars. If this is a vehicular roadway, we are extremely limited in the types of funds that can be available. And the task force is very sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of expenses in town. We're trying to take advantage of as many grant funds as possible. Third, by closing the road now, we begin to change the traffic patterns that need to occur with the long-term closure. I understand that that's difficult for people, but it's better to get started now than to put a temporary solution with a totally different traffic pattern in place that's only going to be in place for a limited amount of time. Fourth, by removing vehicular traffic from the roadway surface, we'll limit further deterioration of the surface. Vehicles going over the surface of the road break up the pavement. Fifth, we've recently learned that the Conservation Commission has jurisdiction over roadway improvements, including paving, due to the proximity of the roads to the lake and to the wetlands that exist on the other side of the lake. And in the two pictures to the right, the second picture from the right shows the lake edge. That's jurisdictional, obviously, but there's also wetland on the other side of the road. So the road is actually sandwiched between jurisdictional areas. Sixth, by closing the road, we'll reduce the amount of roadway surface material that's actually currently going into the lake. In many areas along this stretch of road, the pavement is so deteriorated, it's breaking up, and road particulate is actually flowing into the lake. And in the second picture from the left, there's actually like crumbled roadway material that is actually pooling in the lake. In addition, because of the rough road surface, DPW has advised us that they have to use a lot of sand and salt in the wintertime to keep the surface passable, and that too contributes to a decrease in water quality. And then lastly, by closing the road to vehicles, we don't limit people's vehicular access to either the south end or the north end, but we maintain recreational access along the 1,000-foot stretch. So there is still plenty of access for people to use this area. Now I know part of the board's concern was how long before we're going to have a permanent solution, and we can't be clear on that. But I do want to inform you that the task force is pursuing a CPA grant to try and move forward into the next phase of engineering design so that we can create a shovel-ready project and a hard project budget so that we can then go out and pursue other grant funds, making the permanent improvements. With the decision that you guys made at your last meeting, implementing one way, we as a task force discussed on the 1st that we're confused about what the board's goal is moving forward, how we would implement one way, how confusing it might be to drivers for a short-term one-way solution, and then go to a closure scenario. And then what exactly gets paved? Is the whole roadway width going to get paved, or is only a portion going to get paved? So, you know, if you're unable to reconsider to our recommendation for a closure this year, the task force is seeking additional guidance on what you actually intend with your recommendation. And I thank you very much.
Sean, you want to just go over some of the points about your recommendation?
Sure.
Give me a turn this off, Sean, so you don't get blinded.
Hi, Sean Manduza, Public Works Director. So the reason that staff had recommended the paving of the lake is primarily to protect the lake's health. Because right now there are a ton of fines going in there and a ton of asphalt. So our recommendation, and respect to the task force who's doing a marvelous job, but practically speaking, I believe we were going to keep the road open for winter maintenance, and if we're going to do that, I need to pave it. I mean, it's really simple. The portion of lake that we're proposing to pave is just past the rock, all the way to the boat launch. So the worst section, where it's breaking up the most, where we're putting the most amount of asphalt patch.
If we close the road, what happens?
So if you close the road, you're still going to have some sediment washing in from rain. Additionally, you're going to have organic material sort of working its way into the cracks in the asphalt, which will promote grass growth and continue degradation. So I'd recommend paving it whether you close it or whether you leave it open. That might not be the rest of staff's recommendation, speaking for myself.
I had a question in terms of the Knob Hill work that was done. I saw that there's these rolled hay barrels on the side that.
Sort of wattles. Yes.
Wattles, sorry. Is that something that we might look into doing to prevent, further erosion into the lake?
That's usually used during construction to prevent sort of sediment from going to the lake. If we were to pave it, we would have straw wattles put up along the edge of the lake while we did construction. You could leave them there and replace them continuously, but the amount of sediment that's going in that lake right now is significant, and something needs to be done to address it.
So if you pave it, you won't have as much sediment, but there'll be 3 more years probably of salt and sand going into the lake.
So we're not using sand, it's only salt, but we'd be cutting the salt usage by probably 70%. And we did pave the north section last year, which was in similar shape, and that's held up pretty nicely. So
I just going back to if it wasn't paved and if it was closed to traffic, is there a way to stop the erosion into the lake through the wattles?
this is just a Band-Aid. I mean, anything we do is long-term is gonna require bank stabilization, something much more significant. But we're not there yet. So if it's more than 3 years or 5 years or longer before funding comes through, then we're gonna be left with a larger mess in our hands.
Will the lake deteriorate more if we don't pave it or than we do pave it? Do you think it's going to be better to pave it?
Oh yes, it'd be much better to seal in what we have with asphalt than leave it in the condition we're in.
This is if the road is closed.
Even with it closed, I would say it's better.
Could I, is that the feeling of the Lake Mansfield Task Force? I mean, can I get?
Brandy, if you would speak for the task force, please.
Sure.
If you can.
I mean, I don't disagree with Sean that the condition of the lake is granular and crumbly now. And so, yeah, I think if you get significant rain, you are going to have water washing in. But if you're taking vehicles off the road, it's not going to be breaking up more. And you're not going to be having the wheels spinning, pushing that granular material out into the lake or even breaking it up from what surface is intact. So, in my mind, speaking just for myself, it's probably 6 of one, half a dozen of another, as far as what puts more debris in, natural rainwater washing in the deteriorated surface, or adding salt and an asphalt coating over the top of it. I think either way, we do definitely need to move to a long-term solution and bank stabilization there, which we're trying to do as quickly as we can.
Is one option paving it but not having it open to traffic? Would that kind of that way you wouldn't be salting and you wouldn't be sanding and plowing?
What's that, Sean?
So I can't speak to the politics of it one way or closed. That's not what I do. I'm just saying from a functional standpoint, I need to plow if it's open in the winter, and I can't do it right now. I don't know. I guess it's really the answer to exactly what you're looking for in terms of that's what
I'm just thinking the long-term effects on the lake. So if we're worried about throwing more salt onto the lake and we're worried about more sand and more plowing, is there kind of an interim place that
in order to keep it open, I have to salt it. If I'm even for pedestrian traffic, if we're going to plow it and do any winter maintenance, I have to use salt.
So would it be necessary to, let's say if it was closed, would it be necessary to salt and plow if it was paved and closed, or?
I think all of it is our decision, is
Yeah.
kind of what
Okay,
Sean's saying.
I'm just trying to think of the lake, the health of the lake. So.
Sean would we would like Sean to make that decision, but it is our decision.
Sean,
Yeah, I'm just asking for the health of the lake. Is it better to?
I think the task force is the one.
I mean, so this is where the task force is seeking more input, because our question was, is the intent to pave one lane and leave the portion that's closest to the lake unpaved, or?
So the portion that's closest to the lake is the portion that needs asphalt the most to lock in where it's breaking up. So we would be paving both lanes from past the rock to the boat launch. At least that's what I've been.
So, I don't know how you want to run this, Steve.
No.
I don't want to overstep my
No,
bounds
you're not.
whatsoever, and I
You're not.
respect Sean tremendously, so I don't want to step on his toes too much. But the task force is, we've had these sorts of discussions with Sean at the task force, and there's a variety of opinions, but we are concerned that continued application of asphalt, you know, I understand he wants to seal the surface in, but it creates an opportunity for more petrochemicals as well as the particulate matter to actually get into the lake edge there, so.
So the particular matter that we put in the last 10 years is catastrophic, the amount that we put in. So that's not a
We
great,
agree.
I mean, I don't agree with that to be a conclusion to back into, because we've been dumping patch in historically with no issues, with no complaints anyway.
We're really not, this is our conversation.
Oh, this is your conversation.
Yeah.
So I just had a question then on, you know, signage and policing, and I don't know if this is a Sean, I know that you.
Stay up there.
So it, you know, one of my concerns is, you know, we're kind of teaching one habit and then we're taking that habit and switching it around. So I'm just wondering about policing, if we thought, given thought to signage, and how would we actually police that, making sure that people are going the right way on the one way, and, you know, the faster speed, how it's gonna relate to pedestrian.
I don't know, that's in my purview. In terms of the signs and stuff, I'll build or put signs up however you guys like. But in terms of the policing, that's not me.
I mean, was there thoughts to put a line separating the pedestrian?
All the
versus-
one-way and two-way roads have been discussed, closure with the task force for a while. So there's a lot of plans out there, but it was voted to turn to a one-way. If that's what we continue to do, then we will have an engineer come up with a traffic plan and signage.
I have a question for the task force in terms of funding for the kind of permanent project, and obviously applying for a CPA grant, which would require town meeting vote. And obviously this has become very decisive or dividing in ways. And so I'm just curious about how you've discussed in your meetings getting the vote of the people kind of at the north end of town that are going to feel, or are in the process of feeling as though this is cutting them off, which isn't necessarily the entire story of it, I realize, but I think that in thinking about how we get from where we are now to what we have decided to, which is finding funding to turn this into a park, you know, in a space of safety for the lake, where we get support from the town on a whole to get that funding, because we are gonna need some town meeting funding for that.
Yeah, so Kate, I appreciate that. I think you've hit it the nail right on the head with the fact that it's an extremely complex issue. It is not a simple issue. It's not a matter of pave, don't pave, one way, close, two way. What the task force has tried to do over the last few years is be very deliberative about understanding what our constraints are in that space. And as boring as it might be to members of the public, that space has a significant amount of constraints, and we simply cannot do the important work of restoring the lake edge and keep it open two-way. We know that. Right. And so that leaves us with options that are not universally loved. Right. And so we're trying to find a compromise. And part of the task force concern about this interim paving solution is in part that it does sort of extend the perception that we can continue it as a two-way road, which we just simply cannot. We cannot restore the lake edge. We cannot fill out into the lake to restore that edge. We wish we could, we really do, because that would be simple and we wouldn't have talked about it for 3 years. So where we are at this point in time is really just trying to do, you know, I think as a task force we discussed the last meeting, we need to do a much better job of outreach. We have at various stages in the process had robust public discourse. That's how we got through our 2016 lake plan. We had multiple meetings, we had a lot of input, so we need to, you know, redouble those efforts.
So Brandy, and I understand what you're saying, just from this board's point of view, and that is a problem, it's this board and that could change at any point. We have voted, and that road will be closed once funding is available, or tonight if we vote that way, but that road, as far as this board's concerned, is going to close. So I think getting that message out there is important, that whatever we vote tonight doesn't affect what this board has already voted.
So I just had a question. I don't know, does anyone else have questions? I just had a question about grants. Does this, if it were to remain open, how does that affect grants? You mentioned that it's easier to get grants if it's closed. Could you expand on that, please?
Maybe Chris is the expert, I know. In general, only Chapter 90 funds are available if we use this as a roadway. If we want to seek out funds for recreational trails or stormwater management or anything like that, that would help support the cost to do the buffer restoration, the stream bank restoration, because we can't do that and also put in a two-way road, we can't seek those environmental designated grant funds. I don't know, Chris, did I botch that term?
No, I think Randy, thanks. I think the question was, would interim paving now impact the ability or the chance to get a future grant fund to turn it into, to stabilize the lake and turn it into a recreational space? No, I don't think paving now would impact a future decision. The grant applications for, turning it into a recreational space and stabilizing the lake edge and dealing with stormwater, those environmental and recreational benefits, those come out of the 2016 comprehensive plan. It comes out of deliberation with the task force and with the select board. There's a lot of planning and public policy that backs that up. And I think that's the story of a grant application for a long-term project. What happens in the short term is I don't think part of those considerations by a granting agency.
Thank you, Chris.
So I guess, Chris, since you're there, I'll kind of reiterate my question. I think when I was looking through the 2016 plan, kind of this huge thing, there was is it called a 319?
Yeah.
Water quality grant application,
Yeah.
which we had received for the Knob Hill.
Yes.
And in order to get that, we had to have a promise from town meeting of kind of funds, not necessarily matching funds, but a percentage of the funds that had to come from town. So the town doesn't always, just the promise of saying we are going to close the road and we're in support of this project isn't necessarily the only promise that we have to make as a town to get this project to completion. And so I just want to be sure that if we do change our mind and decide to close the road completely this evening, that the select board and the task force understands the amount of outreach and effort that's going to need to be made to the town as a whole to get them on board for the next step. Sorry, I kind of made my question into an answer.
Yes.
I apologize, Chris.
Right. Future work on that road will depend on the town, committing funds, staff time, etc. to the effort. It's the protection of an environmental resource and the creation of a recreational resource.
Right.
That's a big deal. So future grant funds most likely will look for a town match. And politics is up to you. I think what you've heard the task force say is that the best thing for the lake is closure of the road, and in particular, stabilize the bank in the long term, take away the traffic, etc., and turn it into a recreational space. That's clear, and this board agreed that long-term plan, that's clear. In the short term, I think the task force feels that closure is best for the lake. Sean tonight has added that maybe it's even better to actually pave it in the short term as well, to seal everything that's there in. You can do both. You can pave and close. It may seem strange to people that you would do that, but I think if you're clear in the rationale, that would be okay. So there's a number of steps you can take. Closure, if you keep it open, it must be paved. If you close it, you have different options.
Chris?
I
Oh, go ahead.
I guess my other concern with closing it and paving it, and I think the people that were at the meeting the last time when we were at the senior center and we talked about this were very clear that there would be a citizen's petition to open it if it was closed completely. And so I do have concerns about making the choice to close the road, then we end up at a special town meeting, the road's been paved and it will be open to two-way traffic and exactly what the task force didn't want. So I'm not saying that the one way is the perfect answer by any means, but I do think it is a way to hopefully move in the right direction for the health of the lake, as well as, you know, not paving a road and closing a road and not ending up back where we kind of started, because that would be, I think that would be damaging to the lake.
If a future referendum were to happen and a town meeting never committed funds to this road, it would be closed just de facto, because pretty soon it will be impassable. So that will happen. Yeah.
Right. But if we
this-
close it and pave it, and then there were to be a referendum and it was opened back up, it would be opened as a two-way road, potentially. That would,
be totally up to this board.
okay.
I guess my understanding was that there would be a referendum anyways, whether it was closed or one way, so from what I understand,
Well,
whatever the
Why would there
citizens.
be a referendum?
Not a referendum, but a
Or
citizen's petition.
petition.
Well, that's
I'm
nothing
just
we
saying,
can control,
Right.
yeah.
I'm just saying, but I had a question about the grants, going back to the grants, please, Chris. So if it was closed, and are there any grants right now that it would enable you to apply right now if it was closed? Because then you would be able to say, this is a recreational site that, we need more funding for, rather than having, not being able to apply to a grant that says it's now a road. So I'm just really, concerned that we're gonna miss opportunities and time to apply for grants if it's closed right now, and they can see that we're actually taking the steps this minute rather than waiting for 2 years.
Staff is working on the board's recommendation long-term to close the road. That's what we're working on. We're working on it now. I don't think your decision tonight about the short-term condition of the road is relevant to that. Staff is working on the long-term situation. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
We, as part of the open space task force, that's something that needs to be updated really before we can apply for any open space funding from the state.
Yeah, the open space plan is being updated. That needs to be updated.
Before we
But-
can move ahead.
Chris, what's your best guess, and I realize it's only a guess, before funding from a grant is possible to come through in years?
A grant for, what's the best case for funding for a grant to come through? A grant for what specifically? Because we are applying now for design funds to take, as Brandy said, previous engineering work, which is essentially a 25% design, through to 100% bid-ready, permitted, long-term plans.
Let me
We're
rephrase.
applying for those grants now. If you're talking about construction.
Construction is what I'm talking about, yes.
We would have to have that 100% design pretty much complete.
Yep.
So that will take a year at least. So we would not be applying for long-term construction grants for another year. So minimum 2 years before a construction grant is in hand.
Good.
Minimum.
So I guess, I'm still going back to kind of how we got here. I know that, we had voted as a board to close it, and now we voted as a board 2 weeks ago to have it one way in a direction that seems to work against the Division Street Bridge closed. So I didn't really understand the connection between the latest bridge closure and the way that the one-way traffic will be going on Lake Mansfield. So that's a disconnect for me. And I also feel that, really the big picture is being lost in that, if we really, really care about the lake, possibly with Sean reiterating that maybe, paving is the best thing for the lake, I would like to throw out, well, maybe we should, pave it and close it, because that way, we're really protecting the lake, and, we're following with the decision that we made earlier in the year that, actually the lake is the most important thing, and, having that, stepping stone to a greater vision is something we should really be moving forward or towards, rather than, taking this interim step, which in my opinion is kind of a step backwards and is confusing. So I'm interested in this paving the road and keeping it closed just for the, the long-term benefits of the lake. So, if that's what we really want and we're mindful of it, I would, really say, let's do it for the lake rather than, the politics of, having a stepping stone that might not really, connect to that. So I'm just
You're free to make a
curious if.
motion to rescind the previous vote.
So, okay, so I would like, does anyone else have any more thoughts? I'd like to rescind the previous motion and make a new motion, please. I would like to make a motion that Lake Mansfield Road is paved and closed by November 15th. I believe that was the original date.
A second.
Okay. Discussion?
I think that's probably the best thing for the lake. It's paved and closed.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It fails. Do you have another motion?
We should just close the road and not pave it.
You can do that.
Yeah, I just did.
Okay, so do I have a second? please?
Aye.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, let's try another motion.
Do we need a motion to do what we did last time, or does that stand? if we
That
don't have-
stands if we don't do anything. We could change the direction, that's everything Lee brought up, but that's probably just more confusing.
Yeah, my concern and the reason there's a few. The lake health is definitely one of our priorities. I believe the town decided the main priority, but it's not the only priority. There is still transportation and there is still recreation. And right now, it's dangerous to walk on. It's impassable in a wheelchair. And it's risky on a bicycle. Which is why I think it needs to be paved. And I don't think we've figured out yet what to do with cars coming from the south if they don't keep going. Which is why I would stick with what we did at the last meeting. And I really do appreciate the work of the task force, and in fact, the fact that we're bringing this up for a third time to consider it again, I think shows that we're listening. So I can make the same motion, or we can
No,
read it.
we don't need to make the same motion. Rubbing salt into a wound. Anyone else? Okay, let's move on. Approval of minutes, September